Good evening and welcome to the Monday, October 24th Muscatine School District Board of Education special meeting. Madam Secretary, can you please take roll and help us determine the quorum, please?
Sure. Director Connard.
Present.
Cooney.
Here.
DeBeat.
Here.
LaRue.
Here.
Morgan.
Here.
Phillips. Here. Sure.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you. Please stand to recite the Pledge of the Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Thank you. I would like to welcome all our visitors and media representatives tonight. So we'll have many items to deal with tonight, so please bear with us. With that, we move into our next item on our agenda, which is the 15 million school infrastructure sales, services, and use tax revenue bonds, Series 2022. The first item under that, item A, to adopt resolution appointing paying agent, bond registrar, and transfer agent, approving the paying agent, bond registrar, and transfer agent agreement, and authorizing the execution of same. So we need to have an action. It's an action item, so I will entertain a motion and a second at this point, please.
I'll make the motion to adopt the resolution appointing the paying agent, bond registrator, transfer agent, approving the paying agent, bond registrar, transfer agent agreement, and authorizing the execution of the same.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion before we move to the roll call vote, please? Okay, Madam Secretary, can we have a roll call? And I would like to remind everybody that the response to the roll call is going to be either aye or nay. Thank you.
Connard.
Aye.
Cooney.
Aye.
DeBeat.
Aye.
LaRue.
Aye.
Morgan.
Aye.
Phillips. Aye. Sure.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carried. We move to item B, approve the tax exemption certificate. Same thing, we need a motion and also a second before we move into a roll call vote.
I move that we approve the tax exemption certificate.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, Madam Secretary, can we have a roll call, please?
Connard.
Aye.
Cooney.
Aye.
DeBeat.
Aye.
LaRue.
Aye.
Morgan.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Sure.
Aye.
Okay, motion carried. Thank you. Item C, we move to approve the wire transfer agreement. Again, we need a motion and a second, please.
I'll make the motion to approve the wire transfer.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. Any discussion? Okay, Madam Secretary, can we have a roll call, please?
Connard.
Aye.
Cooney.
Aye.
DeBeat.
Aye.
LaRue.
Aye.
Morgan.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Sure.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion carried. And item D, approve the resolution authorizing the terms of issuance and providing for and securing the payment of school infrastructure sales, services, and use tax revenue bonds. Same thing, we would like to have a motion and a second, please.
Motion to approve the resolution authorizing the terms of issuance and providing for and securing the payment of school infrastructure sales, service, and use tax revenue bonds. Second.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? Okay, no discussion. Thank you. Madam Secretary, can we have a roll call, please?
Connard.
Aye.
Cooney.
Aye.
DeBeat.
Aye.
LaRue.
Aye.
Morgan.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Short.
Aye.
Thank you. With that, we move to our last item on our special meeting agenda for tonight, which is to adjourn. Any motion to adjourn, please?
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn and a second. Those of you who are in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Oppose? Okay, thank you. Motion carried. And with that, we move into our work session agenda. And I'd like to call Madam Secretary to have a roll call to determine the quorum, please.
Director Conard.
Aye.
Cooney.
Here.
DeBeat.
Here.
LaRue.
Here.
Morgan.
Here.
Phillips.
Here.
Short.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you. Moving forward, we move to our next item on our work session agenda for tonight is literacy updates.
We'll have Joelle come up.
Okay, thank you.
Kick off our group.
Please.
All right, well, thank you for having us. I actually brought a team who can probably do a lot better than I can sharing with you, but I just wanted to take a few minutes to introduce the team. I have Hannah Mackey, who works as a district lead for instruction and has been doing a phenomenal job of helping head this work up. I also have Randy Guerrera, who is a teacher at the high school, Sean Larson Wagren, who is an instructional coach at the Susan Clark, and then also Mackenzie Strofe, who is an instructional coach at the elementary level. So I'd like to welcome all of them and thank them for coming tonight. Before they start sharing, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on our work. So the last 2 years, we have been working in departments and grade levels during our professional development time around reviewing our priority and supporting standards, looking at vertical and horizontal alignment, going through scope and sequence, and developing proficiency rubrics. So the work around that has been pretty extensive, and all of our teachers in our district have been working through that. So tonight, when we talk about the ELA adoption, the materials that we will be looking at will support this work. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Hannah, who will kind of walk you through the process.
Thanks. The clicker is my least favorite part. All right, so our whole purpose is to just give you a brief overview of this really extensive process that we've started here. So we've gone through phase one. Phase one is the prepare phase. Phase two is research. That's where we're living right now. So you can kind of see in the big picture. We are in phase two currently. Phase three is develop a plan for pilot. Phase four, pilot the plan. Phase five, final selection of resources and materials, and phase six is when we implement and communicate our adoption plan. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into each step here so that we can hopefully gain a better understanding of our process. So our first phase that we went through was prepare. What we did was we asked all teachers if they would like to be part of this process. Everybody had the opportunity to have their voice heard. The teachers who did volunteer for this process were then given the choice to be a part of one of two committees. The first committee is the District Oversight Committee. You can see their duties up there. They're the research part for us. So they did some research and came together. There was a representative from each grade level, as well as EL, special education. We had several principals and instructional coaches. We just tried to get representatives from to represent our whole demographic. They then made some recommendations. Their recommendations were then given to the selection committee, and that's the committee that we're working with right now. So this is where we are in the process. This committee's job is to evaluate the materials. So we narrowed it down to 4 at the elementary, 4 at the secondary. Their job is to evaluate using rubric, and they will hear from a rep from each of the companies that we have narrowed it down to. And then finally we'll pilot, so the pilot schools will pilot the top 2 choices and complete feedback forms. So that's the purpose of our committees, and that was our prepare stage.
I have the research stage. And so our first step was they brought us all together and we went over the process, but then we spent time dividing into 2 groups. We had an elementary and a secondary group, and we reviewed some of the shifts in literacy, and I thought that was very helpful as a group. So there's 3 core shifts for literacy. There is a more focus on complexity, using evidence. Students use that in their writing, in their reading, in their speaking, and then that knowledge base, so there's a push for more nonfiction type work. So then our next step was to take a look at all these different programs out there, and using those lenses from the research that we had just reviewed, we used that to evaluate the different programs. And we made sure we stayed with like ed reports and other things that are not connected to the publishers at all. So that work, and we had, like you said, a rubric we were using, so some of the things we were looking for, oops, I gotta put my glasses on, was the alignment with the standards, the usability, the text complexity, the student supports being offered in the program, the teacher supports, the types of assessments, the foundational skills and the lower grades, and the building knowledge components. So when we took a look at all those and evaluated them on our own, then we filled out a form, and that brought a list to the group. So the last step, we all pulled back together so that we all had our voices at the table, and we had an opportunity to share the strengths that we saw in the programs that were recommended and the potential weaknesses. I know that the secondary and the elementary might look a little different, but there's also some different needs. So as Joelle was talking about the standards, there's a huge jump in what the standards require when you go to that 6 to 8 band. So ideally we want it to align, and we're not sure what that will look like, but it will align the programs they end up going with. And then this is what 612 I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mackenzie for the K-5. So these are the 4 programs, curriculum programs that we recommended to go forward, meaning that they'll be invited in and their representatives will come and we'll have an opportunity to see the materials and hear the presentations. Amplify stood out. I'll just share a couple things for each of them so you know why they made the cut. A couple of things we pointed out was Amplify offers differentiation strategies for below and above grade level students. It also offers options and pathways for students, and teachers can kind of select which pathways different students might need. The Into Literature one, it had really strong user reviews, and it had strong national ELA voices in the writing process. We also thought that their materials looked potentially engaging, which we thought was important for our student body. My perspectives, a couple of things that stood out, that the materials represent a range of cultures, and the text had a range of genres and types of complexity, which is something we'd be looking for. Springboard, that's the one that we currently use, probably 610 right now, kind of around there. It's our known entity. It's a program we're currently using and have worked with 4 or 5 years now. Strong diversity in stories, and it has a variety of options for strategies and teacher voice. So those are the 4 that the secondary landed with.
Okay, and I've got K-5. I'm Mackenzie Strofe, an instructional coach at the elementary level. We also picked 4 curriculums. However, one of them has backed out, I guess, so to speak. They, I guess, are unable to serve a district our size. Was that? So we're down to 3. The first one up there is Into Reading, and that actually is the publisher's HMH, who has written Journeys, but they also are the publisher of Into Literature. So the exciting thing for that, I guess, would be that it should definitely align because it's written by the same publisher. And there are some really good things that we're looking forward to digging in deeper for Into Reading. Some notes that I wrote down is not just myself, but other teachers were excited about. They have small group instruction written out, as well as whole group instruction and independent practice, which is something that is a goal for a lot of teachers, is to up their independent practice time. Their books are all culturally relevant to kids. They look really great, and they have decodables, which is big for me. So that was my biggie. So that was Into Reading. The next one is CKLA, and the publisher of that is Amplify. So again, I'm hoping that the CKLA would closely align with what 612 is looking at with Amplify. And they are very rigorous. They have a lot of nonfiction books, so it could be used very cross-curricularly. And they do have other subjects if that was ever to come up. So math, social studies, I can't remember what all they offer, but so we thought that was interesting. And then Wonders kind of just slid in there at the last second. We felt like we needed to look at more than 3, which is now what we're looking at anyways. But Wonders, they have, if you go and look up Wonders, they have an older version of Wonders, which was not very good. The newer version was rated much higher, and it looks like vocabulary is very strong in it. They have workstation activity cards that are leveled, which I think K5 would really like, and again, decodables. So, am I next still? No.
Hello, I'm Randy Guerra. I'm a high school English teacher and the department chair. I'll attempt not just to read the slideshow, but I'm not going to promise too much. The selection committee will be meeting the next couple of weeks with representatives from the different programs. The selection committee is going to have rubrics to use to evaluate it. Teachers, for example, at the high school, at the English level, are all welcome to come to evaluate. They just have to make sure that they come to all 3 meetings so we get a valid evaluation of the curriculum. From that, 2 programs will make the cut, and additionally, materials will be at the board office for all stakeholders to review and to look at. The completion goal is to get this done by the middle of November, and I believe meetings are starting next week. From there, we're going to develop a plan for pilot, and it's going to look different. Like at the high school, we have to pilot it because we're the only high school, obviously, but schools will be chosen to be representative of the district demographic. There will be pilot schools across the district at the elementary level. All grade levels and sections will be piloted. How it will be chosen is by instructional coaches. They're going to make sure the units that are chosen from these curriculum programs align with the standards that are being covered in the non-pilot schools. So instruction and learning does not suffer. Piloting principals, instructional coaches will develop a vision of what a successful pilot will look like. They'll have several meetings to establish that before and during the process. And additionally, piloting teachers will receive training on the programs prior to the pilot start date, so they're not coming in cold. And I know at the high school level, we're hoping to at least have 2 teachers per grade level so they can both share their experiences, so we just don't have one representative. We want to get as much data as we can so the program we select is successful.
All right. So I am phase 4, pilot the plan, and we aren't at this stage yet, so I probably am going to read from the screen. But so as Randy said, we are going to pilot the 2 programs that the selection committee chooses. Each pilot will be conducted for 6 weeks, and we're going to work, instructional coaches will probably look at the scope and sequence to see what unit would fit in the current scope and sequence, which one would make the most sense to teach at that particular time. Then we will pilot the 1 unit for 6 weeks, and then the second, we'd pilot 1 unit from 1 curriculum, and then 6 weeks later we would pilot another unit from the second curriculum. Again, whichever however it would fit in our scope and sequence. During that time, administrators would be doing walkthroughs to make sure that we maintain efficacy and that it's being taught with fidelity so that we can give the best recommendation on which program we think is the best. And then there will be some assessments that go along with that that then we will share with stakeholders and with the district oversight committee. And that is we're hoping to be done in April. One thing I would like to mention is we're hoping that, well, I don't know if we're hoping, our plan is that, let's say Jefferson, that's the school I'm at, if we are the ones piloting one program, that we would also pilot the second so that we can maintain, so we have something to compare it to, I guess. And then the piloting committee members will use all of the data that was collected from the assessments. And the district oversight committee would look at the data, would look at the recommendations, and make the final decision on the adoption. And then we would come to you, hopefully at the end of April, to seek your approval of the curriculum that we chose. That is stage 5. And then the last stage, is this, okay. So then once we pick the program, we would share it out with all of the stakeholders. Materials would be ordered. I know as a teacher, we appreciate having the materials before summer, so hopefully they would be here before summer break so that we could familiarize ourselves with them. But then we would be developing a training and implementation plan for the 23-24 school year. I don't know if that plan would start at the beginning of next school year? Okay, yeah. So that would happen at the end of May, where we would make the implementation plan and get that plan started and rolling out.
Okay. No, it's okay. So basically, we'll just kind of open it up to questions that you might have or that the team might be able to answer.
Question that I have, first of all, thank you. That was very well put together. How much, I should say how much, but are the students themselves going to be part of that? I don't want to say decision-making, but you're looking at their input on how you felt that they got it?
Yes, so when we do the 2 pilots, we will get input from teachers, students, and if there's a parent component or piece that we would, seek input from that. We will also have the 2 pilots available for any community members, parents, or staff to come in and give feedback as well. But yes, students would be a big part of that feedback.
I think I have a 2-part. So for the elementary curriculum, is it currently Journeys? Is that what everyone is using? And then Springboard. Okay, so you mentioned the gap between 5th and 6th grade and the standards and what they're expected. What are some other reasons for wanting to switch curriculums?
Well, for one, Journeys is no longer in a published state, so actually they don't support Journeys. We're kind of on our last year of that, so it doesn't even exist in the work. One question that you did ask, though, that made me think of something is when you talked about 6th grade, that's kind of that pivotal year for kids. Some of our curriculum materials are written K-5 and then 6, 8. So we have asked 6th grade teachers that are on our committees to come to both, just so that they can hear it from both the lens of a K-6 continuum, but also a 6-8 continuum, so we can ensure that transition process for our kids. And I know when we had our original district oversight committee, the 6th grade teacher did sit with secondary for some of that discussion, so.
So the ELA curriculum and how it interacts with like the math curriculum. I know I've heard feedback through the district too that sometimes the expectations of an ELA curriculum do not align necessarily with like a word problem in the math curriculum being applied at that grade level. So are those teachers to part of this conversation, or will they see how they could?
Yes. So if you're asking me, like, so for teachers that are departmentalized, you mean? So yes, they were all invited to be a part of the process and have the option. When we do the pilots in the schools, we'll also get their feedback. But yes, they were all invited to be part of it, and are welcome to be a voice if they would like. So. And I don't know if we had any specific questions on our rubric about cross-curricular kinds of things, but I'll check that out when we get back, because I can't remember if there were or not. But I'll look at that.
Well, since multiple teachers were invited, what was your participation rate with teachers? And
Well, we actually work with the AEA, and they thought our committees were probably huge. We had, I don't know, gosh. Yeah. And then we had recently have gotten some emails from other teachers that want to come and be part of that process. And so we, of course, would.
Good.
The more voices, the better. So.
Right, definitely.
And Joel, I want to just follow up with a question on Lindsay's question. I mean, we know, like you are saying that you're going to select a pilot place or class and schools, but are we engaging also those who are not part of the pilot to get their feedback too?
So our selection committee, which are the teachers that are the 7, how many ever we have, 50 some coming in, they're representative of all schools, all classes. So they all have voices in actually looking through materials. And then the pilot schools, there will be 3 out of the 6 that will pilot. Now, if we have other classroom teachers that would like to pilot some units, we'll have to discuss that, like what that could look like. But we definitely will be using 3 schools to pilot K-6. And then as Randy stated at the high school, we have 1 and 1 junior high, so they'll all be involved in that.
Thank you.
Joel, what's the reasoning behind the 3 pilot schools? So how many classrooms, how many classes would that, or sections would that be?
Well, it would be McKinley, Madison, and Franklin. So that's 8 sections for all the pilots. So it's 8 sections of every grade. And the reason being, well, 1, those 3 administrators are on the team, and so they've been involved a lot in the understanding and learning of the programs and the pilots. And then also those schools are representative of our demographics. So
I didn't know if there was ever any thought given to maybe 1 section in every building, 1 per grade level, so that every building was represented. And you still have the same number of sections.
We did talk about that, and I meet, with other state curriculum or other curriculum directors in our area and in the state, and they all recommended that you do it K-6 for the reason of seeing a continuum within your building. You get more of an understanding of a K-6 sequence, and however, I mean, I wouldn't want to necessarily turn away a teacher who really wanted to try something. We would just have to work on how we managed that with the materials and the training.
I think the other piece that I would put in there is not necessarily an easy thing to pilot brand new curriculum. You have to have people that want to do it. By having multiple teachers within the same grade level, within the same building doing it, they can actually help support each other. If it's 1 section, I'm an island, in that building, right? Then I'm counting on the others from other schools. So it can be helpful to have them working together.
We're in a place now, right now, Clint, where we can communicate with each other pretty easily. So I mean, and I think that, I don't want to argue with you about it, but we get away from, that gets away from the collaboration between buildings too. What difference does it make if I can get on my phone, or if I'm having the time that we're going to collaborate anyway is going to be during a break time, or it's going to be after school, or it's going to be before school. It's not going to be immediately, they're on an island by themselves anyway, because you're the only teacher in that classroom, especially at the elementary level. I mean,
Yeah, and
so
I think it can
I get
work
it.
both ways, but I do think, one of the things that we have to set up is training, and I know we have just a few weeks in December to set up training for both, and, they can work in PLCs with coaches, but again, if teachers wanted to, I think we could look at, making sure we supported that, but we just have to work on what that would look like for the rollout.
The only reason I ask, and I'll clarify, because I think you hit it right on the head. I think you have to have people that are 100% behind the idea that I want to pilot this. And I think that you have a better chance of finding people that volunteer. You got 50 people that have come forward and said, hey, I would like to do this, or 77 people that have liked to come forward and like to do it. I don't think it's probably everybody from every building, or from that building. You probably have a better chance of hitting 4th grade at these 3 levels, or I don't know. You guys have done a lot of work. I don't want to step on any of yours. I'm just trying to understand myself.
Yeah.
The other question I had was, Randy, I see your process, and when it comes down to voting, how are you going to decide which one it is? Is it just going to be a simple majority? Is it going to be a weighted scale? Have you even thought about that part of it yet? Because if it comes down to, Randy had talked about, sorry to put you on the spot, Randy, but you're the one that hit me with it. You're asking people to be at 3 meetings, right? And then those 3 people, when it comes down to it, we've looked at all this, how are we going to decide which one it is, right? That's going to have to be something that you're going to have to get to.
You want to address that?
Each person's going to make a recommendation. They'll put them in 1, 2, 3 rank order, so that it's numerical.
So it will be it will be weighted then.
And there's also a really extensive rubric that it takes them through all the different components. So one thing might be, I know Randy talked a little bit about student engagement is a big deal for them. So on their rubric, when they're looking at that, that's probably going to be something that's higher weighted for them. At the younger grades, foundational skills. So I think we have a rubric and stuff to use.
I hate to get contradictory, but are we going to teach our teachers how to use a rubric? Because I could almost think that if you put a rubric together and have people evaluate the same thing, I saw the same thing when we were looking at writing or anything else, if they can all use the same rubric and they're going to come up with 4 different answers if it's 4 different people. So
well,
we'll
have to cross
I'm being
that bridge
negative
when
right
we
now,
get
and
there.
you guys have done a hell of a lot of work, and I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just, Randy, I love to talk to you. I love to talk to you all the time, Randy.
I think there's a couple things. I think the rubric is going to give us a consensus, and people are going to have different opinions. We don't expect everyone to be necessarily on the same page. What we hope to do is at the high school get it from 3 down to 2, and I think also the idea of making people. I worry about just everyone who wants to pilot. I want to know about the people who really don't want to pilot but are forced to pilot, because they're going to have to teach it anyways. So I think there's a lot of value in making sure we're just not saying, oh, you want to do it, because we know who's going to do it, all the people who want to say, but the people who are less, they're hesitant to participate. They're going to be hesitant about doing this curriculum in the first place, but getting their opinion so that when we do this next year with everybody that is successful, I think we need their opinions.
Very valid point. That's why I like to talk to you, Randy.
And I will say one other thing, Mike. When we originally came together, they were all tasked with looking on ed reports, which is research evidence-based, and they all came in with different ideas. And we sat around the table. There were long discussions. They didn't all have the first 3 ranked together. And I thought there was, really good discussion at the tables. And so they came to consensus based on discussion. And so that's, using a rubric, like Hannah's talked about, putting them in order, and then having discussion, we'll be able to come to a consensus.
And I think one of the points that Randy, thank you for bringing up this. Even those people who are not participating, it is important to get them to engage in that process and listen to them, because at the end they're going to become part of that process next year and so on. So that is really great thing that you guys are looking into this and thinking about how you can engage them in that discussion. So thank you. Yeah.
And I like the fact that you said that the materials will be at the board office so that anybody that might want to be able to come and take a look at those.
Yeah,
so.
and we'll have those available probably when Hannah and I were talking, we were thinking probably the month of December. So we'll be able to leave them out for a few, 2 to 3 weeks, and then that way, like, people can come by, you know, either, well, when it's convenient. So we'll have them available.
You know, I have very quick question. If I remember right from your presentation, I think Mackenzie, you talk about the independent practices after every, I think, unit or something like that. Can you give us a little bit more information about that piece? Because I'm really interested in doing something like that, because, you know, students needs to be given the time to, I would say, to shine on their own, and then find out if they are on the right path or not, rather than taking them step by step, holding their hands. So can you give us some idea about that, please?
Yeah. So what I would say about independent practice is what, in my building, I'll just speak to Jefferson, I would say that it's probably district-wide, because in our instructional minutes, we have time for small groups for reading and for math. And for small group reading, a lot of times what that looks like is you take your classroom and you divide it into 3 or 4 groups of kids with like abilities, or sometimes it's mixed abilities. They're very fluid groups, but there's one teacher and 3 to 4 groups. So the one teacher works with a group of kids for 15, 20 minutes, depending on how many groups you have. And while that's happening, some schools are lucky enough to have like a title teacher in there at the same time, whereas other schools aren't, or in some grades they're not. So like I'm thinking of a 3rd grade classroom, they don't have title support. So then that 3rd grade teacher has their group that they pull back to the table to work on the phonics skills they need or whatever they're working on at that level, while the other 2 or 3 groups are working independently. And the reason I brought that up is I think it's important that we look at what curriculums have planned during that time. If you think of a reading block, small group reading block, if it's 60 minutes and 40 of those minutes kids are working independently, we want to make sure that their time is being used wisely and not just doing something that's, you know, like I call it a babysitter worksheet, you know, that you're really not even going to check. You don't really care how they do on it. You just want them to be sitting quietly so you can work with this other group. We want to avoid that, and we want to make sure that their time is being used wisely and that it's helping them to get better at reading. So we don't know what that looks like within that curriculum. It was kind of hard to look at the curriculums online because you can't flip through a basal and see all of the lessons. So that's why we're excited to get it in and look at it.
Thank you.
Yep.
And are there different costs to these different programs? Is that part of the rubric or part of the grading on that activity?
It's actually not part of the rubric, but I mean, we want to purchase the best research-based, evidence-based program. So I know one question, though, we do get asked a lot is like, will we be able to have all of the components to the program, right? Because sometimes it just has the universal part, and then it might have, if the students are struggling, here's this part. And so, you know, we want to make sure we purchase what our kids need, and we should be able to do that. I think Tom's standing like back in the corner, so.
I just didn't know.
He's like, yeah, we got it. Go ahead.
If there was 2 that are similarly close but significant price differences, that's
Yeah,
taken into consideration.
I mean, to be honest, like we haven't even put that into, I mean, I'm just being very honest, not part of our rubric. It hasn't been part of our discussion. Right now, it's really just been that,
I think a lot of times too with publishers, really start to add up all the components, they get pretty close to the, you know, And they used to be, many years ago, when electronic resources first came out, they'd sell you one for, $50, and then so you wouldn't buy as many because you do more online resources. Well, publishers figure out it's the same price, so we're going to charge you for every license online, every license hard copy. So in the end, they find ways. Some will have multiple components, and when you start adding all the components in, it's going to be comparable to somebody that bundles that all together. So, but it is a piece we'll have to look at.
My last question, I promise. How scripted are these? I mean, do teachers get to teach, or are they being, I don't want to jump on our math program, but I'm going to. If we can pull somebody off the street and have them read through, say this, say this, say this, say this, that's not going to help Jamie or help us get teachers into this district that we need to have. We want teachers that want to teach and that they have some autonomy to teach.
Yeah. And, I would say, obviously, I think a lot of programs are scripted, and you've been a principal before, so I know sometimes when you're a new teacher, that's really helpful to have that. Or even if some teachers come out of college, they might not have a reading background, and so for some teachers, that script can be very helpful. And then there are other teachers who may not need it because they have, more background in it. So to answer that, we were not allowed to actually, our first phase was only to look at evidence and research. So we haven't dug into the programs yet, because that's the next phase. But I will probably guarantee that all of them have a script. But if your question is, can teachers veer from the script? They do, but I think it's there for, a help for some teachers. Oh my gosh, this microphone placement is very close. Anyway, so the answer to that is yes, it's a script. Probably, I think they're all going to have some script. Yes, Hannah can add. Yeah.
So one way I like to think of a basal, so that's what you're talking about, is a scripted manual for a teacher. It's going to be the base. It's going to give our teachers a place to start. Some teachers are going to use it a lot more heavily, and some of your teachers are going to feel more comfortable branching out. When we train teachers, we're not only looking at this curricular guide, but we're also hoping to train teachers in strategies for teaching reading in general. So with that being said, that should help our teachers not to just read. It should give them a little bit more creative freedom and the ability to use their art.
So I'm going to lie. So do you see this then as your basal? Do you see that as your guaranteed curriculum, your guaranteed viable curriculum? This is what we're going to guarantee, that every single kid gets this, and
Our
then we're going to
guaranteed
support.
curriculum are the standards. And the basal is supporting the standards that we are teaching.
I think that's the great part about this process that they are going through, and I appreciate all the work and the number of people that are involved, because they started with the standards, and they've really spent a lot of time district-wide at all levels digging into that. Then they've looked at the research, what are best practices for reading instruction. So that's their framework as they're evaluating this. Too often in the past, none of that was done. You just bring publishers in, and whatever's fancy and shiny, right? Then you end up in it, when you really start to look at it, it doesn't hit the standards the way you need them to. So the way that they have structured this process, they're doing a great job with this, and that will help move that conversation forward. But that's it. Our standards are what drive instruction. That's what we want students to know and be able to do. The curriculum, those are the resources that teachers need to get to those standards. And that's what they're selecting. Now that we know what those are, we have a framework of research best practice. What are the different options that best meet those needs? So I appreciate all the time that the team has spent.
Any more questions? Well, thank you, Joel, and all, and your team. Thank you all. Great presentation and great information. We look forward to start seeing some of the outcomes and the results that you share with us, as you said, around mid-April and so on. Yeah. 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 Thank you. Thank you. Okay, moving forward, we move into the facility updates, and I assume Ryan and Russell Construction.
I'm going to bring Lee Marbach up.
Yeah.
Ryan, you can kind of come on up too. So Lee is our representative from Russell Construction. We're going to have them at our board meetings moving forward, so this will be an ongoing conversation. So tonight, Lee's going to share a little bit about the process of kind of where we're at in the process right now in terms of design and schedule, as well as some budget. Now, we've had some of those initial design conversations. Now they've got to go back, update drawings, update budgets, and I think Lee will talk a little bit about that. But it was important that we get Lee here tonight to at least start having some conversations with you. And as I mentioned, this will be an ongoing conversation that we'll continue to have with the board. So, Lee.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me today, and thank you for choosing Russell to go along this exciting journey with you on these updates. So, Lee Marbach, I'm the project executive for Russell on this. A few other folks you may see here with me as we progress through. Erin Marsh is the project manager that's assigned to your projects. She couldn't make it tonight, but she'll be here in the future. And then Tom Hepner may be here once in a while. He's the pre-construction support for the team as well. So just kind of jumping in, and I don't know if they have the schedule in front of them.
They have.
Okay. So I'm just going to kind of touch real high level on our pre-construction schedule, as it kind of will help you to see, working with Leggett in the district, where we're putting our efforts first, and kind of when we anticipate documents hitting the streets to bid and construction to start. So the first one on top is Kent Stein. You see it broken out into phase 1 and phase 2. This is the assumption here. Phase 1 is the new replacement softball field that needs to really go in first before we take the other softball field over. We anticipate that going out to bid here in February, and then construction starting in March, coming to the March board meeting for approval on that. Phase 2 would be the work associated with the district softball and baseball improvements. Our anticipation right now is right around bidding it in in April, and coming to the board meeting in April for approval. Construction starting after baseball season's over in July. Grant, Madison, and Clark secure entrances. This phase, we've kind of lumped in the secure entrance portions of all three of those schools, since they're like, and kind of the highest, the most impact, I would say, to those buildings. Working with Leggett on design and targeting a bid range of that one in April, and targeting board approval in the May board meeting, and then construction to start after school's out. I'm not exactly sure the last day, but that's where we show 6/5. So depending, hopefully we have a nice calm winter and we can stick to that. That'd be great. Next one on the list is Jefferson. That's the addition for the classrooms in the back. We show design progressing through that, and finishing up, going out to bid in late May into June. And then right now we have a July board meeting, tentative approval for that project, with construction starting in July. So that's kind of the function of the first. I guess there's one more, and the first kind of design wave is on the next page is the wrestling addition. If we start doing design on that, anticipate construction docs being done by the end of March, and then we would bid that project out and come to the May board meeting for approval, start construction in May, and finish up before wrestling season, so that'd be in October. So that's what we anticipate for that one. Then we jump ahead in time to the next kind of phase or projects in the design sequence. Susan Clark addition, that's the athletics building, I should say. That project we show starting design in May. So this is, getting through the first design functions, Leggett working through the design, and then going out to bid on that project in February of 24, and starting board approval would be in April of 24, and starting construction shortly thereafter. That one is a longer construction duration, as you can see. This is a bigger building. The Central Middle School Improvements and Demolition Project. This one, the scope's a little not fully identified, but we know we're tearing the building down and there's some improvements. But again, design starting in May of 23, and then going out to bid in March, and anticipating a board approval in May. I'm sorry, that's May of 24. So March of 24 bidding, May of 24 board approval, and then demolition and construction starting then that following May. And then the tennis courts, showing a March 23 design slot for that, finishing up that fall, bidding in November, board approval in December, then starting that project in June of 24, so at this summer phase. So depending where things move on that one, that potentially could get moved up, but knowing that tennis season is in spring and just trying to align with the priorities, that one kind of fell to the bottom of the list there too. So, is there anything I missed, Clint?
Well, one of the things I would just add, so we know we can't do all of these all at once, right? There's some, so part of that is how do they split that out in ways that make sense? How do they split that out in ways that they can ensure that people that are bidding on it will have the staff to do the work, or they'll get enough bidders on that. So by breaking this into some smaller parts, again, I think is the design. That's why this is a draft schedule. Obviously, there can be some things as we move through this process that'll shift around a little bit. But you get to see how all of this lays out. And remember, we're talking about, 2 years of construction bidding. I mean, so it's laid out with board meetings where all those things, where the approvals will be, and kind of really starts to guide that work moving forward.
Other questions? Jefferson Elementary and Susan Clark, similar construction costs. Is the Jefferson schoolrooms more important than the Susan Clark at this point in time, or how was that?
Well, remember
selected on
with
top?
Jefferson, so one of the things driving that project is we have the temporary classroom, the trailer at Madison that we have to get rid of. We know that the city, they've extended our permit for that, but in order to do that, we have to add capacity somewhere else. So that has to get done so that we can move that. We can adjust some of those boundaries and get enough capacity at Madison to move that out.
And that new addition does involve, the central doesn't have to be demolished prior to putting that addition in.
Central can't be demolished until we finish the central kitchen.
Right, okay.
So that's part of the timing on that as well. So it starts to guide which pieces can go first anyway, a little bit.
Yeah, and to answer your question, the addition is in a different location than the central demolished, so they are completely kind of separate.
Somewhat close, but
Yeah.
different locations, but
Yeah.
it just didn't make. All good, thank you.
I have a question, and it may be kind of a dumb one, just from the standpoint that I didn't actually realize we had a horseshoe pit. And I do see where it actually says it's a relocated horseshoe pit. And with that in mind, it looks like that's $61,000 in which to do that?
Yeah.
So,
Right, so right now that's an amenity the city has, and we're gonna take that away. And the agreement with the city is whatever we're taking away from them, that we're replacing somewhere.
and it
Does that
costs that
horseshoe
much to
pit
make a
ever get
horseshoe pit?
used?
How often it gets used?
sorry, I just,
Again, it's an amenity that goes away permanently if we don't replace it.
And I would say as we progress through design, we can actually hone in what that cost is. A lot of these estimates on, the horseshoe pits and different things like that were taken off of a very high-level aerial photograph of trying to, so we didn't go out and measure the exact dimensions of that pit when we estimated it, or what the construction makeup. Typically there's concrete curbs that surround them with sand infill, and, you have the backstops, so they're more than you would think, but, I think that my understanding the agreement with the city is going to be like for like. So we're going to have to work through the design process with the city.
The other thing I know is once you start talking about eliminating something, suddenly people will come out of the woodwork that are horseshoe pit fans. And so for right now,
They can play bags.
What we have discussed with the city is that whatever we take, so we're gonna impact the current bike path. So we're gonna relocate that so that, again, that doesn't go away. So that has to be factored in.
So I see that on the Kent Stein project, the upgrade to the existing baseball field, that figure is the same as what we had talked about before, having some different upgrades to that, like the bleachers, the press box, the backstop. Those are not included in this?
Correct, yeah. So the document you have in front of you is the one that was presented at the last facility meeting. So we're working with the architect to understand what design changes are coming, and we will then update the number, but we have not updated that number since the last facility meeting.
So that'll, again, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, we've had some of those initial design conversations. Obviously, some of those pieces change, like, you know, not the Van Heck Center, but the junior high, Susan Clark, the gymnasium, you know, what we talked about and what was originally bid was much smaller. Well, we're going to make that bigger, okay, but what does that do to the budget? So we have to make all of those adjustments, bring back updated costs, and then we have to make, you know, some decisions and priorities of where we're going to move things around. In Susan Clark, Grant, and Madison, for the secured entrances, there's also money that's set aside for renovation of their existing office spaces. Some of those spaces, like Susan Clark and Grant, have been redone in the last few years. So there may not be very much renovation that happens there, right? So that shifts that budget. So that's where we have to come back and continue to evaluate where we're at from a cost standpoint. It's also why the tennis courts are towards last. So we have to, again, ultimately we have to, you know, we know what that bond amount is, and we have to try to make things work. And I think that's the value also of having Russell as construction management, because they can talk about different ways that we build that, different ways that we bid it out, time it out. How can we basically make the most of our budget and timeline in here? And again, we're doing this with additional contingency built into it and design contingency built into it. So as those design concepts become more clear, some of that contingency may get pushed back into the budget.
So Ryan, I don't know if this is probably for you since we've got this rendering here. I'm just looking at the Bruner part of it, and it doesn't show any bullpen areas. Will there be any bullpen areas? I mean, it needs to be upgraded if we definitely need
right.
bullpen.
And that's something as we get further into the design. This is a very first
Basic,
rendering
right,
overview.
right.
So as we get further into that design, okay, if we need a bullpen area redone, or do we leave it where it's at, like we need to get into that scope as we get further
Yeah,
along.
I want that to be clear because I know
Right.
we've had some people that have had this. I didn't have it till today.
Right.
And some people had it yesterday or the day before, whenever you guys got them in, and they were looking at this and were upset. I wanted that clear that this is just a basic rendering that could change immensely.
Right. Well, and that was kind of, you know, one of the things when I shared that out to the baseball coaches and softball coaches
Right.
on Friday, like if they had questions, please reach out to me. So I've encouraged them, if they have questions, have them reach out to me, Denny, so I can
will.
address those issues.
All right, thank you.
So with the upgrade of Tom Bruner Field, what are the expectations? I mean, will it be a new field, new outfield, infield?
That's what we're still working through the process. What I can tell you is from our first design conversation in working with the coach, there is a priority to the field, and the conversation being around doing turf. Now, the softball field that's proposed there, we budgeted turf for that. So now we'll go back and we'll, you know, look at that part as part of the budget too. And again, as we start to lay things out, what are our priorities? Well, if our priority is the field, then we have to figure out a way to make that work.
And Ken, in addition to that, so we are doing work to the field right now. We spent Friday, we cut out sod, put new sod down. We have scheduled in the spring for new infield material to come in, new clay to come in. So we are doing things as this comes, knowing that we need to be able to play on this next summer. So there's still additional work being done prior to this project coming in as well.
And then the bleachers also?
Yeah, and the bleachers are part of this design.
So this is all contingent upon the city approving their part of it also.
Correct. And the first step in kind of furthering that process is getting a better rendering of what we're actually proposing there. So now that we have this, that can help those conversations move forward. But the city also has, I mean, it's the process anytime they sell land or there are new developments that they have to follow, and that's about a 2-month process. The reality is once we have this and we start to identify the components of it, we'll have a real good idea where we're at from an agreement standpoint. So we can still run parallel paths of designing these pieces, even though final approval from the city may not come until January.
Right. If they decide not to do it, which we don't anticipate, I'm sure, but if they decide not to do it, or if they have charging us for Bruner per se, and we walk away, do we have a plan B?
Yeah, so plan B is a complex somewhere else.
Okay.
And we'd start looking at land. So what's in the bond proposal was a softball baseball complex. And so I don't get the feeling from the city that they want to walk away from this deal. I think they want to make this happen. Obviously, there's varying opinions on all sides about what should or shouldn't be into that. We have to come to agreement on that. The council has to approve that, and you as a board have to approve that, right? So we'll work through that process.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking for is that, you know, our girls softball, you know, has been started 46 years ago, and in 46 years they've had 3 losing seasons. So we need to have something that's state of the art for them, and then also for our boys baseball. Also, we need to get something that's state of the art, and it's hopefully that within this project here that we can do that. Something that we can get people when they come to play and say, hey, we want to come to Muscatine to play, you know, instead of being a haphazard field. That we need to have something that everybody's proud of in the city.
Yep, I agree.
Thank you, guys.
But again, we'll be back to the board. We'll continue meeting with the facility committee as all these conversations move forward.
Thank you. Thank you. So moving forward, we move into next item, or item number 4 on our agenda, name delegate for Iowa Association of School Boards Convention. And please remind me, Karen, you are the one who is representing us on that board?
I did represent the last time, yes, and it's a good meeting in which to be able to do, and you get to listen to quite a bit about what's going on within the state and different opinions and such. This year, I don't know if that's going to be available for me to do because I have a ride that's going to be taking me, and I don't know if that ride would be around for that. And so I would ask that if somebody else would like to be able to take that position, it's worthwhile to be able to take and do it. And I'm trying to think of what time frame that it's at. Is it do you remember? Yeah, we'd still be there.
First of all, Karen, I would like to extend our appreciation for doing that the past year. I know I had the privilege to attend one of those meetings, and it's really an amazing group of people to work with, and I do encourage anyone who would like to take part of that or become part of this, please to let us know what will be the process officially. I mean, do we need to make a decision tonight or to give people some time to think about it and then come back and say, I would like to? Because I don't see it as an action item, so are we voting
Well, I don't know that
on
we need action. I think just as a board, we need to decide who's going to do that. We need somebody to represent the district at that meeting. Obviously, it needs to be somebody who's going, so we know who's going, and hopefully somebody is willing to participate.
So anybody would like to come forward and do that this coming year?
Well, I'm going. Who's going? Is everyone going?
Yeah, I'm not attending this year.
I'm going. Is that the Wednesday morning, or is that the, so we're gonna be there Tuesday night, most of us, I think,
Right.
aren't we?
So I think if Karen wants to do it again, that would be fine. Otherwise, I could volunteer as well. I'll do it.
That's great, Lindsay. Anybody, still, just to be fair to everybody, anybody else would like to try, or shall we go with Lindsay as a great voice for all of us here?
Lindsay will be perfect.
Thank you, Lindsay.
You're welcome.
Okay.
So this is an instructional strategy in a classroom that we call wait time. Eventually, if you wait long enough, somebody will respond.
I'm not a
So
patient person.
a good example of that.
Okay. Well, Lindsay, thank you, and we look forward to have you as our voice there in Des Moines with this.
Thank you,
group.
Lindsay.
So, thank you, and thank you also. And so moving forward, we move into the next item, which is the potential retirement incentive, and I would turn that to Clint.
Thank you.
please.
So again, this is something, the last time we did this was 2 years ago in December of 2020. It's something that, we said at that time, it had been done pretty consistently. And one of the things we talked about with the board at that time is that it wouldn't necessarily be something we offer every year, and we'd have to evaluate that. We did not offer it last year. I know we all received some concerns about that over the course of last year, and we've had some correspondence this year. So as we look at a retirement incentive, some of the advantages of that are there are some cost savings. So as teachers retire, typically you're bringing in some newer staff at a lower salary wage. There's also some cost shift in there as people retire. The incentive is paid out of the management fund, right, and the savings are to the general fund. So it does provide, as we look at, and we'll talk about this in the next item, declining enrollment. It is a way to try to help manage the impact of some of that decline through some cost savings. I think there's, obviously as we talk about this, there's some staff morale piece that's attached to this as well. So the downside of this, and one of the challenges is certainly right now where everyone's having a struggle hiring people. Certainly 2 years ago when we offered it, we had about a 16% turnover that year, which felt like a lot, but it was still within what would be considered typical turnover across the U.S. This last year we didn't offer it, and we had 10%. I know there were some people that were ready to retire last year that had it been there, they would have gone and didn't. So that's something we certainly have to look at. I think the other piece and the other opportunity here is the timing of it. And so in thinking about doing this, the sooner, and so I guess tonight is the conversation. I think we want to answer as many questions as you have, and we've shared some information with you around that, and trying to get a feeling of whether the board wants to move forward with this, because what I would recommend is based on that conversation to have something to you in November to approve or not approve as a recommendation. And the rationale behind that is that then we can have anyone who's going to submit for retirement have that due by January. That gives us the most time possible to, because we know who they are and we know we're going to need to replace them, and we can get started right away. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. Sometimes people like to wait until the last minute and decide to retire, and then we're scrambling to find replacements. So there can be an advantage if we do offer that and doing it as soon as possible so that we know who those folks are and we can begin the process of hiring and replacing those staff members right away. I also sent you a copy of the language that we used the last time. Now, within that, we have the ability to say, you know, what are the criteria for being a part of this, right? And that's, you know, full-time equivalency of, so they have to be at least 0.75 or greater. And we used 15 years of district service. That could be 20 years. I mean, we can decide what that level of service is in order for them to qualify for that. And then we set a base on that and not to exceed a certain dollar amount. So we have the ability to kind of change all of those components. Again, the advantage of maybe moving that to 20 years is it still impacts a number of people, but maybe not quite as many as the 15-year. So again, I want to put that out there for discussion tonight, get your feedback and thoughts on it so we kind of know where to head for November.
I thought we were having trouble getting all the teachers that we needed this year. Does the district have a need to do this? It didn't sound like it this year.
I think, again, you know, long term, the more we can look at it as an option for saving some budget money. We know
our budget's in good shape right now,
but we have declining enrollment. We know our settlements are going to outpace what we're going to get back from the state over time, right? So, I mean, it needs to be something that we have to continue to keep an eye on.
What do we have? What do you
Declining
anticipate?
enrollment, but we're adding school rooms. I know we're getting rid of those trailers with those school rooms. We're adding more rooms.
We're not necessarily adding additional capacity. We're just shifting that capacity.
Throughout
I know
the
from the
district.
standpoint of the 15-year, I've actually talked to several folks, and on one hand, you know, that sounds enticing, but at the same time, you're also talking the difference of them being able to get insurance and things like that. And so that, I think, pretty well stops that category of folks that may, you know, think about it, whereas it would more impact those that are more at the 20-year.
Throughout the district, do schools typically offer a retirement incentive every year, or is it every couple years?
You mean other districts?
Yeah.
I think it just depends on the district. I don't know. I mean, I think it was unusual that it was offered every year. And it's a great benefit, but it's not a guaranteed benefit, right? And again, we try to make that clear that it's not a part of the ongoing contract, and it may not be here every year. But it is a nice benefit for staff.
I guess if you don't know the terms, you don't know how many people qualify under that and the potential of how many people you could lose at that point in time either.
Correct. But we did send, so you should have got some information I linked on there. And it kind of talked about some of the numbers if we did 15-year versus 20 years.
And if you were to have that number accepted, HR able to bring new teachers in because you didn't get them all filled this year, right?
Again, the sooner we know, I think that's, you know, that's the other factor in that. The sooner we know where those positions are going to be, the easier it will be to fill them. And it used to be, you know, it was April, May, June before we'd be out with open positions, and now we're trying to get them out as soon as possible, which is why we've got student teachers that we're interviewing and we'll be hiring right now. You know, as they are working through their term in the classroom, if they're successful and doing well, we're going to interview and hire them because we know we're going to need them.
Hire them for this year or for next year?
Well, it could be that it could be for second semester. It depends on when they graduate. So some of them may do student teaching in the fall, but won't officially graduate until the spring. And in some cases with licensure, we've hired them as long-term subs, knowing that the next year they will be given a contract. So it really is kind of depends on the individual, but we do everything we can to keep them here.
Well, I think we have an opportunity to be creative in trying to entice new teachers to come. And maybe along Matt's discussion, maybe we need to look at increasing our capacity and consider hiring people. If we can find out who's going to retire, hire them for a second semester, let them mentor in that classroom, in that department, in that building, with really no expectation other than to be part of the building. And maybe they help sub, but they get to know the kids. They don't have the responsibility of grading. They don't have the responsibility of discipline. They learn. You have 3 months or 4 months to let them work with experienced teachers and get to know the building. And that could be enticing to get people to come in. Give them a 6-month contract or give them an 18-month contract. I mean, I think that we have an opportunity to be creative, and I'm not opposed to spending a little bit more money to try to get teachers to come in, especially if we know who's going to retire. So I would say, if we, one, I'm for offering the incentive. 2, if we can be creative and it's going to help us in the long run, we can create win-wins for the people that have been served us by offering this incentive, but also create a win-win situation by bringing in new people and letting them get going with relatively little stress. They're not going to come in and be thrown into the fire and have to learn right off the bat. They're going to have supports for a half of a year. So,
And I guess all I was asking, financially we're in a good position, but 2, do we still have open positions for teachers right now? And at that position, I just don't understand why you'd offer an incentive to retire when you're in a position now where you still have open positions. This is where I'm at.
Well, and I think Jamie could probably come up and speak to some of the open positions and also some of what we've done to hire people during the school year. The problem with, so let's say we hire a student teacher right now for second semester and they're elementary certified and we have an open elementary position. Well, middle of the year, you're not going to switch kids around and put them in different classes. We'll hear from parents that kids get comfortable within a teacher, right? What we have done is allowed them to come in and help teach during like core instructional time. So they may take, and we have that now happening at some of our elementaries where we have teachers hired they're gonna do, some of the core content areas to help offset. So during those kind of key instructional times, those numbers are smaller, right? So, I mean, there are ways that we can help fill some of those needs even.
And I would say that we've already offered one contract for January for a high school teacher that we know we don't have an opening for because it's tech ed, but realizing that those are kind of a unicorn because you don't find those applicants very often, just getting that person in so that we can start pre-planning further down the line so we can absorb that if and when we do have an opening. We just had another interview today for elementary, so I'll probably be making offers in the next couple of weeks for those January or December graduates. So I've got, I want to say 6 or 7 more coming up in the next 2 weeks, just trying to be proactive and then getting feelers out for the student teachers that are outside of our district and getting them down to welcome them to Muscatine, and maybe they didn't give us much thought when they were in their program, and trying to get as many as we can lined up. And again, through Clint's flexibility with me, we've been able to bring in teachers mid-year and really be creative in how we fill some of those vacancy needs that we still have, but then also looking at those needs that we might have down the road and where we can start to pair people in a mentoring kind of position.
And Matt, that's where I go along. If we're creative, I think that if you go out and you go to these job fairs, you go to the colleges and you're saying, hey, you have an opportunity to come in and have a mentor, and for half of a year, and we're going to pay you, even if it's not a full salary, it's part of one. I think that we have opportunities to try to entice people to come and give us a chance. All we're asking for is a chance, because I think once they get into this situation, they're going to go, oh, okay, I kind of like this.
And one of those things that, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to kind of piggyback a little bit on what he says, because I agree with part of that concept, and working in even my job for 32 years, we did a lot of that kind of a concept with things. But my question, and it may not be a way to do this, but when we did the incentive last time, do we know how many teachers were already planning on actually retiring before, you know what I'm saying, before then, oh, there's this incentive, so then more jumped onto the bandwagon, so to speak. So, you know, if we got a way to kind of gauge as in how many it would be if we didn't offer the incentive itself.
Well, I think it's changed a lot in the scenery of retirements and incentives over the last 3 to 5 years, just in general. Whereas before, you might have people who were going to go no matter what.
Yeah.
And now, because we have such a different climate and economy-wise with inflation, people are really taking a much more detailed look at their particulars. So I also think that we're kind of getting to that point where, you know, we're going to see that shift to a younger staff. So while we're going to have people who are eligible, it's not going to be these large cohorts that we've seen in years past. And then kind of to piggyback on Ken's question earlier, a lot of districts do these incentives. Like Clint said, they're often not an every year thing. I think that is a very rare exception. I know some of our neighboring districts for a very long time had them every year, and every year said, we're not going to have it every year, but then everybody had one every year. So I think it's kind of one of those things that we want to be very purposeful in when we offer it and making sure that people don't expect it, so that we can start to pre-plan who might take it. Now, am I going to go out and say, hey, are you going to stay? Are you going to go? And what if I give you money? That gets touchy. So we probably won't do that, and we probably won't have that deep of a detail of, you know, estimating who might take us up on the offer. But I also think it very much contends with how old are you? Because, you know, if you hit that 55-year mark, you still have quite a ways to go until you hit the Social Security and Medicare age. And so, you know, there's a lot of different moving parts to it.
Yes, it is.
And I think that just being cognizant of everyone's unique situations are unique, and just trying to offer the best incentive we can as a whole that we can sustain and backfill is probably really what we ought to be looking at.
Right. That's my concern, is the backfill. How many open do we have now?
About 6.
About 6. And then how many teachers do we have or programs that we aren't doing because those teachers are needed in the classrooms because we don't have enough besides the 6 positions that are open?
Those 6 positions are inclusive of the ones that we had to move out of positions, such as a Title I reading position, into a classroom. So what we try to do is, when we are trying to make the chessboard work, we're looking at how can we pull from the least impactful direct contact with students, and teachers in title positions are so valuable, but we also know that we can't go without a 3rd grade teacher. And so we try to take that broad spectrum of how can we give the least impact to our kids when we're reassigning people, even for a half-year basis. And so those are the types of positions that we really have open. We've got a couple title positions. We've got some outliers that honestly, like, we could have had no incentive for the last 10 years and we might still not be able to fill it because we don't have candidates with an art degree. And so there's these outliers that we're really working with, but we took a pretty concerted effort to make sure that we could get teachers in those critical positions that left us with just a very few open spots.
Thank you. And I guess, you know, unfortunately, certified enrollment's next, but we had a guesstimate of what next year's enrollment was too, right? Tom had that magic ball guesstimate of what enrollment will look like next year. Is there a big decline from this year to next year?
So essentially, in the enrollment study, it projected being down about 50 this year, and I think it's down 60 next year, but it kind of settles out around that, you know, 50 students per year over the next, you know, 5 years. Now, again, you'll hear in a little bit.
Right.
We're maybe a little better than that this year, but
Right.
the other, I mean, there's some unknowns there that it's hard to say.
So how competitive are we salary-wise with other districts to draw people in?
We could do better. We are looking at an alternative salary schedule for teachers. We're going to be working collaboratively with MEA to devise what that's going to look like. I don't have a projection for that right now because we're going to be meeting, I believe, on the 7th to start those talks. The nice piece of this is I always try to encourage folks that salary is a large component of it, but we try to tell them, you know, we need to look at the total package because we have a very robust package in benefits. And so trying to get that across to candidates that it's not always just about the paycheck. While that's a big piece of it, we also have these other things that really play into the whole position. I would say we're making steps towards being able to recruit some more teachers with longer longevity from, you know, neighboring states, or they've retired elsewhere and they want to come and just do maybe 3, 4, 5 more years with us. So we're really looking to try to just be as open and, you know, creative as we can with that too.
So is our benefit package comparable to other districts then, or better?
Well, I can tell you from my own experience, it's a phenomenal package here. And the offerings are similar, but or the cost is similar, but what I personally get out of it is heads and tails above what neighboring districts are offering.
So I asked a lot of questions on this topic because I think when we all hear it, similar to what Matt said, we have vacant positions, we have classroom sizes that are not desirable when asking teachers that are in those buildings. And so I think of my own children's experiences where their sub is typically the building principal or the secretary is stepping in. You know, we have all hands on deck all the time in the buildings right now. So it's very nerve-wracking, I think, to, in a way, it feels like we're like, okay, so you can go now, here, we're gonna make it pretty, when really we wanna beg them to stay because we need them. So I know it doesn't quite look like that, but I actually did reach out and ask the questions about who would be staying and going, not directly to all staff, but I reached out to all of our building principals to just ask them their thoughts and how it might affect their building. I didn't hear from 3 people, but the ones that I did, it was really kind of mixed. Some of them thought that it would be a positive morale for those that it would benefit. Not knowing the morale for those that would not benefit from this, I would assume that they'd be a little nervous, but that is definitely an assumption. Most of them thought that it would be about 2 to 3 staff at their building, the most with 4. So if that, from who I talked to, that's 9 vacancies in addition to the 9 that we currently have or had last week. And you did a phenomenal job recruiting last year. I think we had more staff on board than ever, but that was still with a 10% rate turnover. Mm-hmm. And so if we have a low turnover again, and we still come out with vacant positions, I mean, I don't know how we can predict that we're still going to have all of those positions filled at such a great level, because I believe that there are fewer people earning teacher degrees these days as well. So every year our pool is going to get smaller. I think the teachers definitely should be rewarded for their time served. But I think when we're putting the student first, I'm very hesitant to support it.
And I absolutely can understand that level of unsurety because, again, you don't know until you put it out there how many are going to take it. And that's one of the things that I've really asked for is if we're going to do it much earlier because, like I said, I'm already doing interviews these next 2 weeks for like 5 to 7 more people. And then, you know, we also have in our pipeline the teacher para apprenticeship program. So we've got 4 people in that cohort, which will eventually give us 4 teachers out of that, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's 4 we didn't have before. And we're growing our own. But I think the earlier we can get out there and we can find the candidates, the better we're going to continue to be. Now, are we in the same boat as a lot of districts? We are, but are we faring better than a lot of our neighboring Iowa districts or even across the strait? We are doing much better. I mean, when I talk to other UEN HR directors, they're still in 20, 30, 56 openings. And when I said, oh, we had 6 that we didn't have filled at the beginning of the year, they were like, wow. So because the board has been so supportive in doing these measures, we've been able to get out there and do early intervention to find people. So that's on you guys to be able to support that. And I'm really thankful for that, but we just need to continue that momentum and go to where the candidates are. And that's what you have me for.
Well, and I think that the new blood is really good. I like the idea of the current student teachers we have, and we're vetting them already and talking to them and looking at long-term potential. But I think removing the experience from the building, which I know we all can get really stagnant in our roles too, and sometimes change is great, and we all need that as well. But I think that it was probably a few meetings ago, and it stood out to me that there was a report that in newer teachers, the turnover rate is higher. And so I know we have supports in place, but we have seen some fumbling a little bit with some new hires that haven't had the classroom management experience in the recent years. And so to be prepared for that, I'd rather be overstaffed as a district instead of scrambling. I know that you wouldn't, but I think, and that's probably not a popular thing to say, but if when somebody needs to be out or a classroom needs coverage, I mean, we have long-term subs right now that don't have teaching certificates or backgrounds, and we've made it work and they're doing a great job, but that can't be our long-term plan. So
I think we also need to kind of get away from the thinking that just because you haven't gone through a teacher prep program and you're subbing in a long-term position, you're not as good as a licensed teacher. These folks often bring...
I'm not saying that by any means.
Yeah, but I don't want to discount what they bring to the table, because a lot of times those folks bring different life experiences. And so what we're seeing in the nature of education is alternative pathways. That is a huge push in education. The regents are really working towards alternate pathways to bring people from other industries into teaching in a different format. And so I think that we just need to, we don't want to, isolate anyone. We're so appreciative of all of our long terms, whether they're fully licensed teachers or they're sub-authorizations. They're filling such a huge void, and that's part of the thing that we need to consider is how are we going to continue being creative in how we staff for our absences too.
Yeah, and I'll add one more point, and then I will let someone else talk. I'm sorry. But I think with our long-term subs too, as we're showing them that we want them here, if they're not licensed, they don't qualify for our benefits package, right? Because they're not falling into that, or they're
not eligible
under that
for a contract.
threshold. So while they could be a very good long-term plan, we're not also making it easy for them to be a long-term plan.
Well, there's two things. So we can't offer them a contract if they don't have a full teaching license. That's different than benefits. So under the Affordable Care Act, if you meet the minimum hour threshold per week on the look-back period, you qualify for benefits, and that's what the finance department does. So any of those long-terms who are meeting those thresholds under the federal requirements, they are having to offer those benefits.
Do we have any currently that are, do you know of the 5?
I don't know what the look-back period is that they're using. You, as an establishment, you can choose whether that's quarterly, every month, every 3 months, on an annual basis. And so that would be something that has been set up from finance on the look-back period.
Okay, gotcha.
I agree pretty much with a lot of what you said, Lindsay, and I appreciate that comments. And I think along the line of two is what do we do to keep the teachers is a good way of thinking and continual looking at that. But having said that, would we have any idea, in a manner speaking, of teachers that we lose that are not at retirement age are going to be, part of that? How many do we lose of those due to any number, I guess, of things of why that I know sometimes it's because spouses and they move and things like that, but do we have some kind of a way with their exit interviews or something that allows us to kind of get a overview to see, is it communication, which I hear quite a bit, from different teachers, that it's more about the communication and feeling respect rather than actually even how much money that they actually receive.
I think when we get into those types of, and yes, we do an exit interview, from what I have seen coming in, the reasons that they are doing this, they're moving out of state. We are unfortunately a border state, so we are going to compete and contend with the Illinois districts that in half of them, they are paying considerably more money. We're working with people who commute, whether it's from Iowa City, Coralville, Davenport, that just don't want to do that anymore. Those are things that are out of our control unless they are willing to relocate. We're seeing people who are leaving education, period. That's not unique to Muscatine. That is a national trend. The first 3 to 5 years, people, if they're going to leave that early on in that career, that's when they're going to exit because it's not what they thought they were signing up for. That's not unique to us. That's everywhere. And then we also see that people are leaving for administrative positions. So there's a lot of different moving parts to why people are exiting. I would say for our district, we've done a very good job of trying to keep people engaged as much as possible to stay through those growing pains and putting supports in place. Now, in my opinion, and this is just me, I think we communicate a lot. And so it could be on the flip side that we are over-communicating and overloading people. But I think, too, people aren't really sometimes really wanting to give you the real reason of what they're doing. I mean, I hear things and I see things, and that's not exactly what we see at the end result. So those are definitely interesting questions to probe them with. I don't know that it gets us much further than where we're at already. And I think the biggest piece of this is knowing that this is not an island of Muscatine problems. This is a problem everywhere. And that doesn't mean that it's a right problem. It just means that we're not unusual. And so we're faced with the same limitations and barriers that everyone else is trying to fix too. And as soon as I come up with those answers, I'm out because I'll be a billionaire. And then everyone will have a teacher in every single class times 3. So I think that we just need to keep moving towards making sure people have the information they need and making sure that we're doing the best thing we can to keep them happy.
It is, as you say, with all of those, but it really does come down to it. Each individual one of the teachers, they have to feel that self-worth and they have to have that connection. So I just please that if you continue to do what you can to make sure that individual connection with those teachers are done, so they themselves, they may know that, yeah, it's out there everywhere and stuff like that, but they themselves have to feel that self-worth.
And what I've started to see this year is we've had some interest from teachers in other districts on the Illinois side actually reach out to us because they're starting to hear that this is kind of a place to come to. And that's a really good sign because I think that it's showing that not only are the new hires we've brought in, whether they're new or they're experienced new to Muscatine, they're starting to get that spider web out that we're making some changes, and it's going to be slow because it didn't get this way overnight, but that we're going to be the destination where our families want to come, but also where staff are looking to make their home. And so I'm really excited about some of those prospects that, I have one that's willing to jump ship and come as soon as she can because she knows from all the people she's talked to that this is the place that's probably best for her heart. And so that's the stuff that you can't measure, but that's the stuff that really matters.
So how many, we have the instructional coaches and we have lead instructional coaches. How many of those instructional coaches are not in the classroom?
19.
19 are not in the classroom? And we have 2, a 5th and a 4th grade that's not filled. Can't we put them in the classroom?
They're paid with different money.
You want to dance? So TLC is part of the pupil allocation. So, for example, it used to be a choice if you wanted instructional coaches. Now it's not necessarily a choice. So we, TLC generates a pot of money that we can use for teacher leadership as part of the TLC, as part of the state recommends for building teacher capacity, supporting teachers, all this other stuff that we've talked about. Currently, we have 19 TLC positions. They are used in the classroom when needed. Currently, one of our coaches at the, instructional coaches at the high school teaches 2 sections of AP Psych because they do not have a teacher. So, but our TLC positions are a full release position, meaning they don't have a full teacher schedule like our teachers.
So is that funded by this, I mean, is that an additional funds from the state? That's
TLC
not
comes from state.
from us?
Correct. It didn't used to be, and then, I don't know,
Well,
Tom, I don't know when it shifted.
first started out that way, it was a grant or something.
Correct.
Everybody got
Correct.
that.
And then it morphed into the pure pupil allocation, and I'm not too sure what the, right.
It was a 3-year rollout grant where a third of the districts would start in year 1. This is how we're going to allocate.
So are there specific rules that say that since we are short staff, that we can't put 2 people into the classroom?
Well, we do cover with them when we need to, but we've been able to kind of shift, like Jamie articulated. We took a title teacher and placed in a kindergarten position, and then we have a long-term sub who was a retired teacher that is filling the title position, who has 30 plus years of experience. So we've had to do, we've done situations like that. I'm trying to think of, 2 of our TLC positions are mentoring and induction positions, and that is required by the state. The district has to have a mentor and induction program, so 2 of our TLC oversee that. Prior to that, we belonged to the consortium through the AEA, where we would pay them for our mentoring induction coaches, and from a financial perspective, it was a little bit more cost effective for us to internally coach our own and have our own. So 2 of those TLC are mentoring induction coaches that specifically only work with year 1 and year 2 teachers, and then our other instructional coaches support are what I would call our year 3, year 4 teachers. So teachers that come to Muscatine that have a valid teaching license, so they're not a beginning educator, but they still require 2 years of mentoring. So our instructional coaches support them in mentoring them as well. It would be something that we would have to look at because our TLC generates a large portion and that we're able to use for salary, plus if our coaches if they do serve our intervention groups, then we can kind of take that. So we can kind of shift dollars based on their certification, but currently they are a full release, meaning they're not teaching in the classroom. They're there to support teachers.
Right, yeah, and I understand that, but I guess, I hope that the state would look at something like that and say, you know, are we really serving the students the best by taking our best teachers out of the classroom? And I know we have to mentor teachers, but we're taking our best teachers and making them mentors and taking them out of the classroom where they have direct student contact.
Right, and the role of the coach is 2/3 of their roles and responsibilities are in the classroom where they are co-teaching and teaching with teachers. So our coaches are in the classroom, but if you look in Power School, they don't have scheduled kids with them, but 2/3 of their role is supporting teachers in the classroom, and the outcome is to improve student achievement, obviously. So indirectly, they work with our students, but in a little bit different capacity than a full-time teacher in the classroom.
Thank you.
Yep.
I only have one question. Your exit interview, is it face-to-face or is it an online?
It's a survey.
A survey?
A survey link we send.
Have we thought about going to a face-to-face one?
And here's the only reason why. They're really reserved to fill out an anonymous survey. They're very reserved to talk to someone face-to-face. If they are, I will absolutely meet with them and hear concerns. And, you know, if they've got specific things that obviously we need to know, that's always an option. But it's really hard and very trying to get them to do something anonymously, let alone face-to-face when they think that you're, like, their hat is hung on that meeting. So I'm always willing to meet with everyone.
Could that be the first question? Do you want to meet face-to-face? And if it's no, I don't know. Because I do think that there are people that probably would sit down and tell us a different story or want to. I don't know for sure. But I don't know. I'd be one of them that when I left, I would have told you exactly what I thought.
Well, just to kind of circle back around to the retirement incentive piece, I know there's reservation on behalf of the board. I think I have reservations too. But ultimately, I think, although we are in a good position budget-wise, we'll be negotiating with all of our bargaining groups this year, right? We know, obviously our starting salary for teachers, that we need to make some adjustments there. For our paraprofessional and hourly staff, we're competing with, Walmart, who's now, I think it's $24, $26 an hour. You can work at fast food restaurant for $17 an hour, and yet we're trying to recruit people in to work in our nutrition services program. So we know all those salaries are going to have to go up. And there's some, so there'll be plenty of conversations on that. So we know settlements are going to go up. Our enrollment is going down, and the long-term trend will be to continue to kind of go in that direction. We know, right now we've had the advantage of ESSER funds. That's going to sunset. I'm concerned about the long-term prospect of state revenue. Obviously the new money we get from the state is not going to offset our settlements with bargaining groups. It just won't. It didn't this past year. And then just depending on where we at with budget guarantee, like we saw this past year, we have to pay that budget guarantee back the next year. So really that new money for us ended up being a negative amount of money for us, right? Because we have to come back to that budget guarantee. And I'm also concerned long-term. I think the state's, changing some of the state income tax. It's great. I mean, people feel good about that. I just don't know in 5 years, what kind of overall impact is that going to have on the state's budget? I don't know that. And I'm concerned that where are we going to make cuts then down the road from revenue? Well, will be up first as not getting some of that. So, to me, that's kind of pushing me, like, I think we should be doing something. I don't think we do it every year. And I think you have to determine whether this is the year or not, to do that, and kind of what level we do that with. I think the sooner we do it, the better, because the sooner we get that out and we get some confirmations on that allows us to be as proactive as possible in hiring.
Clint, I would agree with that part of it. I think that trying to get it on the board agenda for November so that we can talk about it as a board and have better numbers. If you're able to ask that question out front to people and then we get an idea in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I know that that's a really quick turnaround to have those numbers, but I know. It's that catch-22 situation.
How do you bring them to the board originally? I mean, how'd you do it the years where there was provided? Is it something you develop and then bring it to the board for review? So you're going to bring it to the board in November with a 20-year, here's your incentive to discuss, or you bring in multiple items?
We would probably just bring one recommendation, based on some of the conversations tonight. That would include, timing, eligibility, and all of those pieces. And we've got some weeks ahead then to answer any additional questions that the board has in making that determination. But again, I get the hesitation. I think that is one of the one of the challenges right now is with ESSER funds and some other, we have access to more supports from a funding standpoint than we've ever had before. And this is not just us, this is every district, right? And we have the smallest pool of candidates we've ever had before, right? And we're lucky. I mean, there's other districts larger than us that have significantly more funds than we do and really don't have the ability to spend them on staff and student supports the way we'd like to. So, I get that a lot. Again, I think there's just a number of things that are at least indicating to me is let's not wait until we're in budget crisis to start making decisions that improve the budget. That as we do this, as we go along, and knowing if we're doing it this year, I can tell you we won't be doing it next year, right? So whether it's this year or next year, it's not going to be an every year thing.
Not needing to know who would take it, just knowing that whatever your number that you're going to provide in November, you're going to obviously know with HR who would be eligible, and if HR would feel comfortable in thinking, yeah, we could fulfill those retirees plus whoever's going to move away with applications would be.
And that's the piece
my
the piece
guarantee.
We can't count on is who's moving away, because a lot of that happens. Sometimes it happens in the summer.
You have your history of what you've been seeing over
Spouse
the
gets
years,
transferred, and then
10% or whatever that activity is. So I think it's got to be a higher hurdle than what it's been in the past, because I don't know if there's a need for it this year.
Clint, I've been trying to look back at your email you sent me about the past.
I'll send that
retirement.
again.
No, I just can't see it very well on my phone. So what's a potential number of retirees if we offered a package?
Pull up my.
I'm sure it looks like I'm probably watching the Bears game, but I'm not.
So right now it would impact about 39, close to 40 staff if we used 15 years, and it would be 33 if we used 20. So, and that's across all levels, and includes some administrative staff as well.
Do we know how many of those are going to leave no matter what?
Again, that's the difficult question to answer, right? Will all of them take it? No. But at some point, we got to set a threshold and then see who comes to the table.
Any more questions? Or so the plan, Clint, is to put together some sort of proposal with as many information as we are asking as a board here, and bring it in November for discussion.
Yes.
And possible action.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you. Moving forward, we move to the certified enrollment updates.
So I'll just run through some of these numbers quickly. I think as I'd mentioned, through our enrollment study, we were projected to be down about 50 students. Right now with certified enrollment, we're just under 30. We're down 29.7 students, which is the lowest number that we've had for at least 6 years, which would put us at 4574 certified enrollment this year. Now, along with that, our high school numbers are higher than what we projected they would be, and our elementary numbers are lower than what we had projected to be. I think one of the challenges, our open enrollment out is up. It's up about 30 students from where it was last year. Our open enrollment in is up, just not at the same, it's not kept pace with it for this year. And the challenge in that, and I'll tell you, the challenge in open enrollment, especially out, is the rules changed. So it used to be there was a deadline, and after the deadline, you didn't have to approve it. It gave you a little bit of leverage, whether you could say no, or you could say, hey, before I decide on this, I want you to meet with the principal, I want you to do these things, right? and sometimes you get people to change their mind. Now they can really apply for open enrollment at any time, and there's not many ways where you can say no, right? So they can go. That's posing some other challenges just from a funding model of who's paying what districts, and I know the state is, in talking with Tom, is still kind of working through that, but that's going to be a little bit of a nightmare to track down. But that's had an impact on the number of approvals that have gone out this year compared to previous years. And that's going to continue to be a challenge. The other piece that we'll have to keep an eye on moving forward, and I think we mentioned this with the enrollment study, the number of live births 5 years ago was down significantly coming up here. So it was down about 90 babies. And obviously when those babies turn 5 is when we typically see them come into school. Now that couldn't bounce back up. It is not a matter of us not having a birthing center. It's the number, because whether they're born in the Quad Cities or Iowa City, their address is Muscatine, right? So we know what those numbers are. So that's something we're going to have to keep an eye on. Obviously, our number of students graduating has typically been higher than the number of students coming in. So we know if you're graduating out more than you're bringing in at some point, you're going to continue to see some of those challenges. So I think the good news is it's a little bit less than what we expected, but again, it's still a challenge. The number of open enrollments out, we'll have to continue to work on. We had a number that have chosen other online programs throughout the state. It seems like a number that I've signed. And some of these numbers are kids that we've never actually served, right? They moved in, they bought a house here, but they've been attending Wilton or L&M, their whole lives, and they want to stay there for right now. So, we have some of those that we've also approved. So, again, there's some good news, there's some not so good news, but things to keep an eye on as we move forward.
Clint, with the open enrollment out, do we know if it's primarily, do we know the grade level? Is it primarily elementary kids? Is it primarily secondary kids, or we just don't know?
I can get a breakdown of that. It's a little bit all over the place.
I mean, I don't think it needs to be by grade level, but it would be nice maybe if it was K5 or K6, and then is it middle school or is it high school kids? Because if they haven't been part of our system at all, that's one thing, but if they have been and they've left, then probably want to know that.
I might have brought this up before, but questioning as in with our, when we're looking at alternative high school that we've been talking about getting on board, do you perceive this as a way then also to help us retain then a significant number of students, or at least a little bit of students? Or
I think it could have an impact on that. I don't necessarily have a, I think that as we look at the alternative program, the ideal program that we'll offer, it's going to serve 75 to 80 kids. It's a smaller environment, and some kids just need a smaller environment.
Ew.
Now, if they're open and rolling out because their perception is that, L&M or Wilton are a smaller environment for them, we might. But I would say that's probably not a very large number. I think what the alternative program will really do is ensure that we're getting more kids to graduation, because right now they're either not comfortable there's a reason they're struggling and at risk, and some of those kids are dropping off, right? And this provides another option for them that's more work-based. It's there's more one-on-one with those students, and provides that kind of smaller environment. So I see that having the greatest impact on our graduation rate, not necessarily open enrollment.
would that include recruiting, maybe perhaps students that had already dropped out in this past year or two, and then try to have a way to bring them back in the fold?
I think there could be some of those students. It just depends on what they've, sometimes we do get kids that will say, yeah, we, after being out for a while, they'll come back. There's some options for completion at MCC as well. The other piece that we're talking about and moving forward with the high school is a night ALC program. So it's just some extended hours where students can get some additional support after school. It might be for some of our kids that are online that are struggling a little bit, so they can come in. So we have some ALC supports during the day. We'll have an extended day opportunity for them, and then at some point, trying to develop that alternative location for them as well.
The one issue with having kids that have been gone for a while is that they age out. Once they turn 21, they're gone. So if they've been gone for a significant a year or two, it's really, are there any kids that aren't being served right now? I mean, I hate to be blunt, but the immediacy really is the kids that are in school or not in school that should be right now. So to answer your question, I don't think that kids that are 2 or 3 years down the road, like, we don't want to give up on them, but legally we can't serve them once they turn 21. They're done.
Sure, and part of that I agree with, but I also have talked here recently to a 15-year-old that basically said we kicked him out of school and he doesn't want to come back.
Can't be kicked out of school.
It's kind of like finding out what's really the story here, on there, so that there's more to it to find out what got him to that point.
But
if there are,
he can't be
we
kicked
will
out when
have,
he's 15.
We will have students that are being open enrolled into other districts because, parents aren't happy with what's happening, within our environment. Sometimes they've gotten letters for attendance or they've been in trouble and, well, we're going to go here. More often than not, a lot of those students end up back with us at some point anyway, right? So we'll see some of that fluctuation in this. Again, by and large, the majority of people open enrolling, it's because they've moved in and want to stay where they're at. Those kinds of things. It's not necessarily people just aren't happy, and typically if somebody's really not happy, we find a lot of those coming back.
Thank you, Clint, for sharing the information with us and answering the questions. So moving to next item on our agenda, we have the second reading on policies. 702.8, bond disclosure, a new item. 702.8E1, bond disclosure, Exhibit 1, a new item. 702.8E2, bond disclosure, Exhibit 2, a new item. 106, assistant animals, a new item. 504.5, public performance by students. 504.6, contests for students, suggested to delete this policy. 506.6, requirements for graduation. Any questions about any of those policies? Okay. Thank you. We move into the announcement of upcoming meetings and events. November 9, 2022, Riverbend Mobile Food Pantry at the Administration Center, 4:30 to 6 p.m. And note that the date changed from November 8 to Wednesday, November 9. November 10th, 2022, 2-hour early dismissal. November 11, 2022, teacher in service, no school. November 14th, 2022, the community conversation at 6 p.m. at the lower level City Hall, and November 14, 2022, the annual organizational meeting of the Board of Directors at 7 p.m. at the City Hall. So moving forward, we need to move into a closed session for superintendent's evaluation per Iowa Code Section 21.5I. So I would like to request 5 minutes, perhaps break, to move into a different room. While we're doing this, I think I need to...
I'd make a motion that we go into closed session.
Second.
Okay. So we do have a motion to move into a closed session for superintendent's evaluation per Iowa Code Section 21.5I. We have a motion, we have a second, and Madam Secretary, can we call for a roll call, please?
Connard,
Aye.
Cooney,
Aye.
DeBeat,
Aye.
LaRue,
Aye.
Morgan,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Sure.
All right.
Thank you. So let's have 5 minutes to regroup in what room?
We're in the West Room.